Welcome, Sadie. Welcome, Steve. Thank you very much. Just going to have a little chat. Just quick introductions. In that Sadie, East End girl, played basketball in London for many years. Played for England, point guard, and according to her stats, it was slightly different to Sadie's view that she never gave the ball away and there was no turnovers but loads of steals. And then went into teaching and decided that she'd rather coach rather than teach. And then I first met Sadie when she was director of basketball in Scotland, and we worked very closely together on various programs. Then moved back down south and has led active Sussex in its various guises for a few years in its teens. Steve was a graduate out of the Birmingham basketball conveyor belt, played professionally pretty much all over the country, apart from Birmingham, and then became a basketball development officer in Worthing. And I first came across Steve when we were talking about regional and national officers for basketball. And Steve fairly forthrightly said, "Nah, I don't want a regional job. I want that national job." And then absolutely wowed us at interview and did a brilliant job at basketball, putting active sports on the ground that had a fundamental effect on membership and club structures that I still think's a legacy now, probably 20 years on from that. And then left basketball, similar time to myself. Actually went down to Sussex and managed the sports partnership there for a couple of years before moving over to Wesport. And now running, like Sadie, very active partnerships, engaging with the broad range of sports activities and the broader range of physical activity and economy in the area. So two great people. I've got huge respect for them and their opinions. And whether they're the same for me, we'll soon find out. But so just really quickly, guys, we're going to look at Black Lives Matter. What does that mean to you? Sadie, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Well, I suppose it means a lot of things, but we haven't got that much time. So for me, it's kind of like the embodiment of what's happening in terms of prejudice meets power, and how that's enacted and how that has impacted on the lives of Black people. And particularly, as we know, with the George Floyd murder in plain daylight, it really has brought to the fore some of the things that are still happening that for me are quite systematic. Now there's so much history behind why that kind of thing still goes on in the US, but actually a similar level of systematic racism goes on in the UK as well. So for me, growing up as a Black British person with multiple heritage, with my parents from the Caribbean, but having been born here, I get to see all perspectives of it, and I can see the inequalities quite clearly. So it's almost like that campaign is almost like them walking in my shoes, but letting other people know about it, because I don't think people realise from the perspective of a Black person how it feels to grow up in this country.
Steve?
I mean, I suppose the starting point for me was just anger at seeing another Black person basically just killed in the street by powers of authority. And the disappointing thing is it wasn't a new feeling. But I think what's felt different for me this time, I agree with everything Sadie said, by the way. So I think what's felt different for me this time is it's not just been people from the Black community that have been outraged by what they've seen, and it's not been a local kind of issue that's just stayed in one place. It has become a global conversation. So for me, I think it's allowing us in England, in the UK, to have some conversations that we've never been very good at. We've always felt quite uncomfortable talking about race. It's like, oh yes, we'll deal with that. We'll have an equality policy, and we'll take some bits of paper off applications before they come through. But but it hasn't really made any difference. So we just kind of toggle on. But I think there's an opportunity for a different kind of conversation that hopefully will lead to some changes.
So, I've worked in Birmingham for many years, and worked in and around Handsworth not long after the Handsworth riots, and there the issues that came out were employment, educational achievement, housing, and people in positions of responsibility and decision making. Has that changed much in those 30 odd years?
Well, no, not really. I think Sadie and I are amongst some exceptions, who despite the way the system works, have managed to transition from, being at a high level in athletics into high level roles within sport. I mean, Sadie's roots, women's basketball, playing women's basketball to the level she did, alongside holding down a professional career, I think is massive in itself. And I got to laze about and bounce the ball and not worry about anything else for a few years. As a professional athlete,
living the dream, Steve. Living the dream.
But still, I think for both of us, you have to think beyond your initial career and start to work out what you wanted to do next. And we've managed to find some traction and prove our case. But I think it is true. You do feel like you have to probably work harder than other people do, who got to a similar level just to stay there. And I'm quite proud of my personal achievements that I've had. And I've always tried in each of my roles to make sure that I'm working in the right way and with the right values and morals. But there isn't an easy fix to any of this either. But I also don't think it starts necessarily with us.
I'd echo that, because I think there's a lot to do with personal motivation and education and personal aspirations and setting goals high, because even though I didn't have any, role models in business that I could look to sort of say that's what I want to do or who I want to be, personally, I just said, well, this is what I want to do, and these are the steps I need to take to get there. I started off as a PE teacher and pretty quickly discovered that wasn't for me. So I enjoyed the sport. I was educated in physical education and child development and science. Those were my subjects. But actually, I pretty much figured out that I didn't enjoy teaching. I actually preferred coaching people who wanted to learn. So I kind of thought I'll step out of that environment and look at a career that can educate me in business and law and banking. That's where I went. And I kept the sport separate. So that's how I developed. But it was interesting. I have an anecdote whereby, I was playing at a very, very good level. I think 1985, I was probably what I might even call at the peak of my career, and I was still quite young. I think I was awarded a Player of the Year, but that's by the by. The story is that,
just drop that one in gently, yeah.
As you do. But I went over to Belgium with my club team, London YMCA, and played in the tournament. And long and short of it is, we won the tournament, but a guy over there wanted to recruit me to play professionally in Belgium. And at the time, I was working for a well-known bank and progressing my way up the career ladder. And he kind of said, well, we'll get you to come and work over here, etc., etc. It won't be a problem. You can combine your professional career with work. So, of course, I thought that was wonderful. Was about to jack in my career, and I said, well, what's the work that I would be doing? He said, oh, all our basketball players, particularly you of colour, you work in McDonald's. Penny dropped. So, of course, I didn't give up my my career as a banker to go and work in McDonald's and play basketball. But the anecdote of that is that, that's the perception that at the time people had of high-level professional athletes. It was almost like shut up and dribble, shut up and play, that's that. So for me, I just came back and thought, what, I will aspire to do as much as I can to the best of my ability in my career, and the sport is something I enjoy, and that's the way I've always looked at it.
Yeah, I mean that would be answer to the next question. Really, as a white person, I have no clue what it's like to be a black person, none whatsoever, and I can perceive it, but I sense there's less direct discrimination than there was in the 70s, i.e., no black people applied, blah blah blah. But I sense there still is stereotyping and indirect discrimination. And so, what's it been like being brought up as black British people? What discriminations? Steve and I have talked about the number of times black people get stopped compared to white people, all that sort of stuff. So what are the experiences that what is it? How could you describe it?
Am I allowed to say a pain in the ass?
Say what you like.
Constantly. Here's a good anecdote. Worrying about where I can go on holiday and how I'm going to be perceived as a black person. Worrying about, can I book this holiday with my partner, with my husband, without being hassled? So, I would guess in your shoes, if you fancy going to, I don't know, any country, you would just check it out, book a flight, book your holiday and go. You wouldn't worry about it. Yeah. For me, as a black person, particularly with a white partner, it'll be, how's this going to be received? How are my children going to be treated? Now, why should I have to think about that? Well, I shouldn't, should I?
Are you talking to Europe?
Wherever. I certainly, there are places I wouldn't even contemplate going, but that's not even just as a black person. It could be if I was gay or whatever else. There are places that just don't accept differences in circumstances because of their own beliefs and political beliefs. So growing up in school, usual name calling, I can deal with that, but it was constant. So you just grew a thick skin, and your parents just basically told you to be quiet if you don't want to get yourself in trouble. From dodging the NF when they came down your street parading, to being quiet in school because they were talking about monkeys and educating you about, it was just ridiculous, some of it. But,
see?
Yeah.
Well, I guess, I can give you dozens of different incidents, of being pointed at just for being different, being stopped, all the rest of it. But I would say overall, pretty lucky in a lot of ways. And I say lucky because I think basketball kept me out of trouble, a lot of the time, because that was my focus. I was going, from 14, 15, I was getting on a bus, traveling to West Brom, 3 times a week, hour and a half on the bus each way, doing my homework when I need to do it, and just playing basketball every opportunity I had. So I think that in a lot of ways that kept me away from some of the people where it might have been more of a challenge, and I might have been in situations where police decided, stop me more often or whatever. So in a lot of ways I was lucky. I also was lucky that I had, 2 parents that were still together and both worked, and we had a pretty stable family background, and so that helped as well. The biggest shift for me growing up, I can remember we moved house, and I had to change secondary schools when I was 13, and that's an age when you've just kind of really built your friendship group. You got a few people from primary school that you're still friends with, and you got people that you share an affinity around sport with, and you connect with them. And then all of a sudden at 13, I went from this school that was really quite mixed, where I hadn't really even thought about my colour, where there were, all kinds of relationships going on between people of different races, to a school where I was one of 5 black people in my year. It was very different, it was name calling, it was fights, but again, the one place where no one could talk shit to me, basically, was playing sport, particularly basketball.
But I mean, I think that's important because you've both mentioned that. So I sense that there is an element of discrimination in sport, or is that me? Is because as black people you've achieved?
But I think
maybe it's talking to those friends of yours that didn't achieve it. Was there discrimination in sport? Because the perception is no, you're measured on your ability.
But I think that the discrimination in sport isn't necessarily at a playing level, particularly in a sport like basketball. Right? Bottom line, most of the people that coach, rightly or wrongly, want to win, and that's their ultimate goal. Mm-hmm. If they've got decent athletes and people that they can develop or they can sign, then great. That's not where the barriers have been. The barriers have been in administration. And again, since I had a role at England basketball as part of senior management, I'm not sure there's been another black person in the senior management role in England basketball. The nearest of that is Steve Bucknell, who's doing his best around the talent pathway right now. And then there's people like Sadie that give up their summers as volunteers, to engage in the national team programs to give something back. But, there are issues there. And again, when the GB program was created, if we stick to basketball at the moment, the coaches that were brought into that program, there was no one, from a BME background in that coaching team. And it's that was a time when there was loads of money in the sport. There was no contingency plans made around how we built a legacy on the back of the investment we had around 2012. So, it was another time as a sport we've just kicked ourselves in the teeth. But I think the frustrating thing for me is all the evidence now, right, if we want to talk modern times, all the evidence about diverse teams, diverse boards, shows that they outperform non-diverse boards every single time.
Yeah.
Right? So actually, all these organisations that aren't embracing having a diverse culture in their organisation, they're hurting themselves.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, Sadie and I talked about, she's a point guard and, key position, and as we were talking about, if you look at black footballers, first one Viv Anderson, it's for the 8 years I think till somebody was picked in the England football team down the middle of the pitch. They're all down the wings or down at fullback, whatever. And you're a black point guard. I don't remember that many black point guards or go-to players in the England team for quite a while. Did you perceive that as discrimination, or was that not an awareness at the time?
That's a difficult one. Around about my time, I can only think of 2 other point guards that were around the National League at the time. One was Alex Raymond in Brixton. And I think the other one was at least 5 years after me, actually, if not 10, which would have been, more than that, coming from Youngbloods. And I think there may have been a couple in Birmingham, actually, on quality cats.
Yeah.
Who never got to England training or anything. I don't know whether it's because they were looking for a particular mentality or relationship between the coach or affinity to the coach. I can't put my finger on it, but I cannot think of any other point guards with the drive or vision that was required, I suppose, that were selected. But
I'm slightly younger than Sadie, just slightly. But that
you don't look it, but there we go.
I know I don't. I definitely don't. But I think one of the things that was interesting, I think I was part of a generation where we did start to see a shift on the boys' side around representation, where there were a lot more young black players that came through into national teams and international league, British black players. To the point where it was a conversation that one of the issues with the league was it was too black. And that's one of the reasons why we struggle with sponsorship and various bits and pieces. So all of that was kind of underlying it, but I didn't care, you know.
Yeah.
Our job, you know, the way I saw it, our job as young players was to outperform these older guys and get them off the court. You know, that's what you started to do. It didn't matter whether they were black or white. That, you know, but there was an awareness within the sport that there was a shift happening at that point.
I think also in the 7 years that I've been England and GB team manager with the under-18 national programme, you can quite clearly see that income, socio-economic status plays a huge role in selection, because where there are insufficient funds to ensure everybody is paid for and, you know, your travel is covered, etc. I've had situations where parents haven't been able to afford to send their girls to training. So if we trained at the National Arena in Manchester and you have a cohort of girls coming from London, East London, South London, they try and travel together, etc. But it's the case that actually I've had a parent ring me and say, I cannot put my child on the train because I can't afford the train ticket. So I've paid for that train ticket in order to give that girl the opportunity. Yes, I've reclaimed it from Basketball England or GB England, but for me, when you look at some of the programs we've put together that require the girls to be successful, in order to be successful, to travel in a 3-week time span to France, where were we? We went to Greece, and then I think we ended up in Austria. But if you think about all the travel that's required for those girls, and for parents to have to get them up to Sheffield, up to Manchester, to pay for uniforms or additional uniforms, not the standard stuff that is issued, it's a big financial commitment. And when you think about those players that are coming from that area, they are predominantly black and ethnic minority. And I can remember posting a photo. I was really proud of the team that was there, and it wasn't a single black face. Now, that wasn't all because they couldn't afford it. That was because 3 girls that were selected actually chose to go off to the States that summer, so they deselected themselves. But the appearance is that these are the 12 white girls who can afford to play for the national team. And for me, that was really sad. And, you know, that was the reflection of society itself, basically, in that, you know, how are we developing and making opportunities available to young people of colour?
And I do just
years ago, I had the same with the team I coached in Birmingham. You know, under-18s, talented under-18s, they could not afford to go training from Birmingham to London or Birmingham, whatever. And I think they ended up getting there tired because they're travelling and whatever and underperforming. And you know, so Steve,
these are some of the most talented young people playing basketball that we can't access, or the governing body can't or don't enable to access. And hopefully things are changing, but that was my experience.
And again, having had 2 kids go through the talent pathway, you know, over recent years, I can tell you it costs a lot of money. You know, luckily we have the means to have been able to support both of them through that pathway. Both Luke and Kyla represented England at every age group, or GB at every age group they could. You know, so. But you're right. If you didn't have the money and the time as well, because it's that time commitment, especially when they're 13, 14, 15, you know, and you're driving them from A to B. You know, it did make a big difference. And you're absolutely right, Sadie. And those are the type of things where, you know, those are the things we've got to focus on. You know, how do we balance those things out to make sure it's your talent while you shine through, and not the fact that you've got a bit of talent and your parents have got enough money to support you to access, you know, national team or county or whatever opportunities, because there's a lot of work before you even get there.
Yeah.
So now, you know, moving on a little bit. So, you know, the Black Lives Matter came out, and there's umpteen government reports that are sat there on educational achievement, the Lammy report, the criminal justice stuff, all that sort of thing. And our Prime Minister came out and said he wanted to change the sense of victimisation and the sense of discrimination. And then Dominic Raab came out with comments about the taking a knee being a bit of a Game of Thrones thing. Now, historically, you know, it's Martin Luther King and Kaepernick and all that sort of stuff around the gate. But what was your feeling when you heard that?
Well, either either they're incredibly naive or they know exactly what they're saying.
Okay.
And it's one of the two. And I guess it's for each person to decide, you know, which of those they think it is. Because obviously what they're saying isn't accurate. It's not a sense of, you know, it is actual, demonstrable, reportable, statistical, you know, that's all there. So either they're being incredibly naive or they know exactly what they're saying.
Sadie?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. And for someone who's never even watched Game of Thrones, the fact that he was talking about that just went over my head. And the fact that for someone who is highly educated and in the second most position of power in government, doesn't even have an inkling about the history of taking the knee. No one's saying he needed to have been taught about it, but you pick things up as you go along. You know, he's foreign secretary. What does he not know about foreign countries and culture, etc.? So I just think he showed his own lack of education and perception. The fact that he could even liken, you know, something that happened in the 60s in terms of civil rights and what that actually meant, because I was brought up like a lot of Caribbean children through church, and although I was too young to be aware of the assassination of Martin Luther King, I was fully aware by the time I was 6 or 7 of discrimination through things that have happened to me when I was that much younger with my parents, and because my parents told me about it. So I was educated from both perspectives, and therefore taking the knee, I knew exactly what that was about. You know, it's not subordination, it is showing empathy, and it is about prayer, and it is about wanting a better life for everybody. It's certainly not about what people are thinking it might be about. And so yes, I thought Dominic Rabb's was, you know, showing his ignorance, and the sense of victimisation can only be sensed if you're walking in a black person's shoes.
I mean, you know, and quite a lot of the immediate stuff came out, and you worked down Bristol Way, Steve, and the statue of Coulson, etc., was thrown in the harbour, etc., which I think has an irony. I think you mentioned that to me around, you know, that's where he brought his ships into, etc. And I don't, you know, I was aware of Coulson, but not aware of how embedded it was, and also not aware until recently that we were still paying people off for the fact that they gave up their slave trade, etc. And that was only recently finished in some cases. I mean, what's your view about the statues? Because you know, there's that alternative view. Well, you're taking away history, and you know, you're blotting out history. That's the alternative view. What was the view down Bristol Way then of course? Because presumably it had been on the agenda for quite a while, hadn't it?
More than a while. I mean, this is a conversation that actually traces right back to the turn of the last century, where they were talking about some of the statues in Bristol. And over the last 10, 15, 20 years, it's been a constant topic of discussion. You know, to the point where there are buildings that had his name on that were already planning to take his name off of it. I mean, this guy made a lot of money, you know, basically selling people and transporting them across the world and treating them literally like, you know, bits of fodder, throwing them overboard if they got sick or died, you know, and that's how he made his money. Now the flip side of that is he was a massive philanthropist and investor in Bristol, and there are countless good causes that his finances have benefited. That do, you know, I think the frustration. Just on the corner. I think the frustration of many people in the black community and others in Bristol has been the unrounded view of Colston that was given. You know, it was, you know, this is one of the great sons of the city type of thing. You know, we should try and recognise that. I think the argument's always been about, you know, the whole of his legacy and slavery being part of that, and that being acknowledged. Now, I absolutely get the symbolism of bringing that statue down and rolling him into the harbour. There was a real symbolism for that. That meant a lot to the people that were there. Bristol has a black mayor. I think he's had a very difficult sort of line to walk. He's obviously can't condone vandalism as a mayor, but at the same time he's been quite open about saying, he's had strong views about Colston's presence in the city and the way he's celebrated. So I completely get it. Do I think every statue of anybody that ever did anything bad should be knocked down? Don't know. Don't really care. But it's about, I think the statues are a distraction. It's about recognising the whole person. If you're going to celebrate somebody with a statue, then recognise the good they've done and the bad they've done. All right?
Yeah,
especially when it's as headline as it is.
The statue up in Scotland, I can't remember who it is, that actually describes that he was a slave trader, etc. Sadie, your thoughts? Because, London has, got to Churchill, which is interestingly, Boris Johnson tweeted out 8 times about Churchill and once about Black Lives Matter on that day. I mean, is there a case where somebody's good and addressing, in his case, fascism, can negate what he did around Bengal and etc.?
Well, like Steve said, it's about educating people about the whole, the black and the white, and I don't mean skin colour. And it is about, if you think back to the time, we can't walk in their shoes. We don't know what the atmosphere and environment was at the time the statues went up. But what we do understand looking back is that they are to glorify people who have done good things for their community. But of course, it's from the perspective of the good and those that have benefited. It's not really about what happened to the other people. So we don't see the rounded history. There's a really good programme on at the moment, which is in 4 parts, called Black and British and the Forgotten History. And so last night's programme was about the cotton mills and how the industry up north in Rochdale really thrived, but actually there was an issue with regards to slave stopping work way over in the south, and how, in the deep south of America, and how that obviously affected the import of cotton and all the issues there. So I think telling the history from the black and the white perspective is necessary. Whether or not government are willing to do that is another matter. The fact that a programme like that is actually sitting on BBC 4 rather than on BBC 1 speaks volumes. I think it was first aired on BBC 2, to be fair, but it's about educating everybody and people willing to accept and acknowledge. No one's saying they need to apologise. There are different ways of doing that. Actions speak louder than words, for sure. But it is a matter of educating people about what these statues represented back in the day and what they represent now. And if for some people it is an affront, and I agree with Steve, it is a distraction, but they need to actually say what this person done. And if it is so bad to have the statues out there on display with the same connotation that they had when they were first put up, then that's not right. That needs to be corrected. And if you're going to take it down, put it in a museum where people can then understand what it's all about. I learnt a lot about slavery and stuff from school, but I learnt more about slavery from actually going up to the Museum of Slavery in Liverpool. And that was very, very moving. It was horrible. And it was me as a black person having to confront my black past. Now, how horrible would it be for the white population to confront their past? And that's what needs to happen. And then that understanding will gradually lead to systematic change in the way they treat people of colour.
Yeah, I mean, I found the museum in Liverpool incredibly moving and quite shocking, to be quite honest. But I think from a white person's point of view, that challenges perception and the perception and story that we were told at school. So I was told a story historically of a fantastic, educating of the world, of the British Empire,
and explorers, etc.
Yeah, so that, and I can remember the first panorama programs of when, you know, Windrush and black people coming over here, and I can literally remember the program saying, oh, here, you know, here are people from Jamaica, you know, happy but simple, you know, and so, you know, my parents heard that and they believed that because it was the BBC. So I think that challenges that whole perception of what white people have of history, and how we change that. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how we do that. You know, is it about you know, starting at the bottom in schools, or is that about a public information, or is I'm not quite sure how that happens really. Or is it down to the individual to educate themselves?
It's going to be. There's no silver bullet here. You know, it's like most things, we've got to use a kind of mixed approach. You know, you would hope that through, you know, most of the media sources that most people use, that there'll be opportunities for people to find out more. But it's still a choice, Simon. People have still got to make an active choice to seek out, understand, and empathise. But the one good thing about the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement over recent months, is it feels like there are more people that are taking the time to do that.
I think it's very different from other black-led movements before, because it is about, let's, you know, it actually has a lot of people who are not black that are actually in there and part of the involvement, and I think that, you know, it feels a little bit different, I sense. Yeah. I mean, anything else that we should do, you know, because you look at RFU, the whole, you know, swing low, swing chariot bit, which, you know, was written by a slave, and, you know, has loads of metaphors in there. You know, what else do we need to do in a way, or is that on you? Is that on society? Is that on government?
Well, it's on everybody, and it's at different levels, isn't it? And it's the extent to which those in power are prepared to look at the impact of what it would mean to their power, the extent to which they have to relinquish it, share it, look at it differently, deliver it differently. Collective power. People just want things to be done equally and with integrity. And I feel that, you know, you can look at the way not just black people may be exploited, but even if you look at your Eastern European population that come in, that do a lot of work here. You know, I've had this conversation with a friend of mine who wanted me to explain Black Lives Matters to her as opposed to All Lives Matter. And my explanation was that if you're going to include black people in all, then until black people's lives matter and are equal, then you can't make the statement all lives matter. We're not saying that everybody doesn't count. That's the issue I was trying to explain. But she made the point, you know, that it's about oppression as well as race, which is correct in terms of the people in power want to retain that power. They don't want to lose or change their way of life, but they shouldn't be scared to take that. They need to have some courage to actually change what they're doing, because they can still retain power. It's just a better type of power, and it doesn't have to be just solely retained by somebody because of their skin color or their background.
Could enrich their lives as well.
Yeah. So, you know, there's things like swing low, sweet chariot. Well, find out what the connotations were. Simple. And you'll understand why it may be offensive, and then you'll stop singing it. Because it will chime with your values or your lack of value.
I mean, I first sang that when I was doing my degree in the 70s. You know, as part of a rugby squad, but you know, seeing it on Blazing Saddles, that's a completely different interpretation again. Right. You know, and that, you know, a whole heap of different things. Steve, any final sort of thoughts?
I don't really have a lot to add. I would agree with what Sadie said. I think it's on everybody, you know, to act with authenticity, I guess. You know, is to go and do some research, you know, build an understanding and think about what it means in your own individual life. You know, what does it? You know, what conversations are you involved in? You know, are they talking inappropriately about black people? You know, have you just let those slide for the last 10 years because it's, you know, your Uncle Jim or that's just how Auntie Thelma is or whatever, I don't know. You know, is there a chance to be more proactive in how you approach things and not just let things slide? And I think that's something everybody can do.
Yeah.
Sadie, final thoughts?
No, I think I've probably said what I need to say. I just feel openness, integrity, and a bit more understanding would be appreciated.
I love that little phrase used right up front, which is try walking in my shoes.
Mm.
You know, I think that for me is I really love it, because, you know, trying to think about the perception of what would it be like, and, you know, and yeah, brilliant. No, thanks so much for your times, guys. That's been really enjoyable.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Take care. Stay safe. Bye.